Hello brewers and beer lovers. Today we have a very special video because we are going to be brewing one of the crown jewels of the lager world. Today we are going to Czech and we are going to brew this double decoction mash Czech Pilsner. Let's get started so we can show you how we made it. Now, to make a proper Czech lager, specifically trying to emulate a Czech Pilsner from the town of Pilsen, we need to do this traditionally. And traditionally, you need to be using Bohemian style Pilsner malt. In this case, we are using Weyermann's version, and this is traditional floor-malted Pilsner malt, which means we're gonna get some incredible delicate flavors, some biscuity notes, some honey characteristics, and some nice traditional malt complexity while still keeping our beer really light, crisp, and smashable. But it's going to be 100% floor-malted Pilsner malt in this particular case. And it's in the mashing itself that we're going to build that caramelization and melanoidin effect. But we'll touch on that a little bit more when we start talking about decoction mashing. For now, we're going to be running with 8.8 kilos of this stuff through the grain mill. Grain mill stuck! It's also important to note that it's really traditional in Czech to mash your grain mill, because that's how you know you're gonna get a really good beer for the day. This is actually how they do it there, true fact. But they have to also do it a second time because it's a double decoction mash, so you gotta do 2 rounds of mashing through the grain mill. 3 times. We're live. 4 times apparently is what the Czechs do. Now, let's talk water profile. For our water chemistry, we are just gonna focus on being extremely soft, extremely delicate. Czech lagers don't have a hard water profile, and it's one of the reasons why they allow so many more of the more delicate or the more nuanced flavors to shine through, is because the water chemistry is so soft and in the background. So in this case, we're going to be running with 23 parts per million of calcium, 5 of magnesium, 15 sodium, 31 chloride, 32 sulfate, and 57 parts per million of bicarbonate. If you can avoid the bicarbonate, that would be great. I'm stuck with it. It's in my tap water and I don't have reverse osmosis system set up here. So something I've got to do in future. But the reason why Czech lagers can have such high quantities of hops in comparison to other lagers is because that water chemistry is so subdued. It doesn't cause extra harshness, extra bitterness that you would have with a harsher water profile. So aim for as soft a water chemistry as you can get for this one. If you don't know how to run your water chemistry, check that video up there. It explains Water Chem 101 and everything you need to know about it to get started playing around with salts. Now, let's start mashing. Now it is time to mash in. We are going to be mashing in with 35 liters of strike water today. The freedom units will be showing up on screen throughout this video, courtesy of cameraman Odin. And I just inhaled all the grain dust. You should really wear a mask when you do this. That can't be good for your lungs. But we're going to be mashing in with that 35 liters at 64 degrees Celsius for the first step in this mash. That's going to be followed by a step at 70 degrees Celsius, 30 minutes on each. But we are also going to have decoction mashes going on throughout this brew day as well. But I'll touch on that a little bit more whilst we mash in. There's a lot of water to grain ratio this time. So I've intentionally done more water to grain than I normally do because we're going to be decoction mashing. What that means is we're going to be taking scoops of grain and wort out of the mash tun and plonking it into a pot which we have on a separate hot plate. On that separate hot plate, we're then going to be stirring the entire time because we're going to bring that grain to a boil. That is the essence of decoction mashing. But because I'm going to be removing about 1/3 of what's in here each time I do that, I needed to make sure I still had enough liquid inside of my mash tun to still run the recirculation pump and everything properly without running too dry or the levels getting too low. Make sense? It's more of a logistics thing of this Brewzilla itself than it is that you have to have a really high water to grain ratio. But I find when you're doing something as complex as a decoction mash, it helps to give yourself room for error. All right, that is mash in done. If you want to make your life a whole lot easier, get yourself a brewing paint mixer style thing like this. I'll drop a link down below on where you can get this from Kegland. We do have an affiliate program with them. Full disclosure, we get a small kickback every time you make a purchase using our referral link. So please do so if you're going to buy some stuff anyway. Helps us keep supporting this channel to keep making more content. Now, we are going to let this rest for about 10 to 15 minutes. After that point, I'm going to start scooping this out and kicking off our first series of decoction mashes. But for the time being, let this rest for a little bit and make sure that you're ready and set up for the boiling of the grain side of things. Now, a decoction mash is essentially when you'll take out about a third of the mash, a thick mash, so a lot of grain to water ratio, whack it into a separate pot and boil the bejesus out of it. The key thing here is you must always, always, always be stirring because you do not want any scorching. So you need to be very hands-on if you're going to decoction mash and make sure that grain is always moving so that you don't end up burning a bunch of that grain on the bottom of the pot. But the whole idea behind this is by boiling these grains and the sugars within, you're going to cause a whole bunch of Maillard reactions, which causes melanoidins to form in those grains, which are really complex, basically caramelized sugars that give you a flavor unlike anything else. You could absolutely try and replace this with melanoid and malt and get a very, very good result. So if you want to do the easy way out, just remove the decoction mashes and add about 5% of melanoidin-based grains. But if you want to go for the true, authentic Czech style, it is 100% Bohemian Pilsner malt, but with those decoctions thrown in to add that extra complexity to the beer. This is going to give you extra sweetness, extra mouthfeel, extra head retention, and just a unique quality that is really, really hard to replicate in any other way. So I'm very excited by what this beer is going to turn into by going back to our brewing roots. It's also worth noting that it does look, in most cases, like you can actually increase your mash efficiency by doing a decoction mash because you're exploding a lot of these starches and these proteins, which make it much more accessible for the enzymes to actually break apart those sugars. So often with a decoction mash, you can end up with a beer that actually has a lower final gravity than what you originally anticipated. It's been about 10 minutes now, which means we can start our first round of decoctions. The reason why, by the way, I wanted to give it about 10 minutes before doing anything, I need my gloves. The reason why I wanted to give it 10 minutes before doing anything was because I still wanted to get a level of conversion from this first round of steps in this mash before I started blasting apart all the sugars and enzymes in the grains that I'm about to boil the bejesus out of. Doing this because I'm a fool and I apparently am just incompetent at taking things. Just do it better. Just do what I did, but do it better. That was a very weird way to take that out. I was worried about burning my hands and I stuck my fingers in anyway. Whatever. We're here now. Stop judging me. Time to scoop.
You need it?
No, we'll be fine. Time to scoop. So I've got a big old metal ladle that I'm going to be diving in with. And again, I want this to be quite thick. So go for a pretty decent amount of grain to liquid ratio in this. Doesn't need to be like super dry, but just make sure that it's not as thin, I suppose, as what your mash would normally be. Leave the majority of the liquid in the mash tun and focus on scooping out quite a lot of grains for this step here. I'm gonna aim for about 10 liters or so of liquidy grains, which is about half of this pot, more or less. Once I've got about that much, I'm happy. The reason, by the way, that you aim for about a third of the mash is because traditionally, this decoction mash step was what was used to actually raise the temperature of the mash because we didn't have sophisticated brewing systems way back in the day when these beers were first being made. So they would take out a set of the grain and the liquid, do the decoction mash, and use that to then pour back into the main mash to raise the temperature to that next step in the mash cycle. So if that first step was 64 degrees, they'll do this decoction to then raise the mash temperature to the required temp of, say, 70 degrees, for example. So a very clever way of brewing with not a lot of fancy equipment. How's that? Maybe a tiny bit more, and I think we are good. One more scoop for good measure. Nice. All right. Now, I'm going to pop this on here. Before I whack that up to getting up to temp again, I'm going to throw on my filter so that I don't need... Oh, I've goofed up. There we go. Okay, well, look, I'm going to be honest with you. This has not been done very cleanly. I promise that this doesn't need to be that complicated. I am just inept tonight. Let's do the decoction part, shall we? Is that mashing? Yep, there we go. Nice. Now, decoctioning. You can go back over there. We're going to blast the heat onto here. And from this point onwards, I am going to be stirring, non-stop stirring. Start your timer for 15 minutes and continue to do this until that hits. Hey Siri, start a timer for 15 minutes.
15 minutes.
This episode was not sponsored by Apple.
What if she said no, bitch?
Well, then I guess I just got to cry and accept it.
You got to start counting.
How many seconds in 15 minutes? What's 60 times 15?
Too much, man.
900 seconds. Is that right?
Too many numbers.
900?
Probably.
They'll show up on screen if I'm right.
Yeah.
How's my maths?
Not bad.
Just reminds me of that show. Are you smarter than a 5th grader? You don't remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah? Maybe that was a very Australian specific thing. I don't know if that was an international thing. Great, good show. Good show. Really good at making adults feel really dumb. Now, what I do want to point out with this is you're going to see the color difference between this right now, and at the end of 15 minutes, you'll see a much darker coloration on these grains due to that Maillard reaction. Had to take the jumper off. I was starting to cook, doing this stirring and being on top of the kettle. But we did want to talk about here for a moment that we're definitely already seeing a color change. So this is what it looks like now after about 8 minutes of stirring. And it'll look darker again once we reach the end of 15 minutes. But we wanted to flag here that, look, decoction mashing does require a lot more work and a lot more effort, and there's a lot more chance for things to go wrong. So you really do need to be diligent with the stirring constantly, because the last time we made a decoction mashed beer was the Oktoberfest Marzen, linked to that video up there, where we absolutely butchered that brew day. One of the biggest parts that we got wrong was the actual decoction mash itself. We were trying to use an induction plate on quite a cheap pot, and because when this cheap pot starts to heat up, the bottom domes, so we didn't have enough contact area of the metal to the induction plate, which meant it heated up way too slow. The other part was, I thought I was being all clever by throwing in a false bottom into the bottom of the pot, and I thought that would mean that I wouldn't need a stir. It's very wrong. Definitely scorched badly, and luckily that flavor didn't come through in the beer, but that very well could have just absolutely butchered a very hard brew day. So don't try to get too clever with this. Just go old school, throw it in a stock pot, and keep on stirring.
Spin to win.
Spin to win. Okay, that is 15 minutes of decoctioning done, and it's time to throw all of this back into the main mash. Don't have any way to grab the bottom of the pot. And in she goes. Look at that color difference. That is way darker than when that grain was when it first went in. And this is going to help not just to give us all that extra flavor that we spoke about, but also help give us a bit more of a golden color hue to this particular beer. Because without it, it would be quite pale, very pale indeed. And granted, we are going for a pale Czech Pilsner, but we also do want a little bit of beautiful golden color showing up that is so famous in Czech lagers. And this is how you get that color. Just rinsing out what is left in here. Nice, throw that back in, and in the rest goes. Now, it is just about time for this thing to start stepping up to the 70-degree rest, and this is going to help raise that temperature very, very close to it. So I'm going to go ahead and blitz this mash a little bit, because we should be just about hitting our next step of the mash. Okay, That's definitely well and truly mixed in now. I'm gonna go ahead and replace my top screen for the next 10 minutes of mashing, just to assist with this recirculation a little bit. And then we can come back for decoction number 2. Now we have gotten about 10 to 15 minutes into our second step of mashing, and it's time. Wow, that grain looks way darker than the first time I scooped out. You should do a quick B-roll, Odin, for the viewers on the side-by-side between now and before when we first mashed in. But we are going to do the exact same process again. So we're going to scoop out about a third of this mash, aiming for a thick mash, and we're going to rinse and repeat, making sure that we're stirring the whole time. We've got that flame on maximum heat, and we're getting lots of those delicious Maillard reactions, creating those lovely, lovely melanoidins. Whoops. I'd love to get through one brew day where I don't make a mess. Yeah. I don't think any brewer.
Definitely not for a decoction mash brew.
No. I don't think any brewer has ever gotten through a full brew day without making a mess. If you comment down below that you did, I don't believe you. I don't believe it's a myth. It's like catching the Bigfoot and the Loch Ness creature hanging out and having a tea party together. Yeah. All right, pop filter back on. Actually, might quickly hose down this side where I've spilt stuff everywhere. And back on goes that filter. Boom goes the dynamite. We're almost there. There's an alarm for something. I don't know what that one was for, but time to get back to the brewer's workout. This is why you don't need a gym if you're a brewer. Just decoction mash, man. You'll have biceps like Thor.
You'll be able to drink like Thor.
You'll be able to drink like Thor. Smashes beer. Another.
Let's do it. Time lapse, see the difference.
You gonna hold that pose for 15 minutes?
Not a time lapse.
No, if I've got to mash for 15 minutes, you can pose there for 15 minutes. Okay, time to mix our decoction back to the main mash. There's my towel. Alrighty. And in the sloppy muck goes. Ow! Burnt my finger. I touched the pot. Don't touch the pot. All right, that should darken things up considerably. Now I'll once again rinse out what is left in this pot here, but we are now moving on to our mash out step, which is at 77 degrees Celsius for about 10 to 15 minutes. The whole reason of that being we want to make sure all these enzymes are now deactivated so that we don't make this beer too dry and end up with no head retention or anything like that. Not that I think that's going to be too much of a problem considering how many decoctions we've done, but always good to have a mash out anyway. After that has finished running its course, we will come back to do our sparging. The mash, and the mash out specifically, has finished up, which means we can lift up our, oh, that's heavier than I expected, our grain bed, and start sparging. Whew, I'm getting a workout today. All right, that is draining out nicely, beautiful. I never seem to have stuck sparge issues in the larger Brewzilla in comparison to the baby Brewzilla, and I have to imagine that the diameter has a big role to play in that. Even though if you ran the same amount of beer equivalent in both, just having that extra diameter just gives better spargeability, better drainability for all the grains. I am digging that color. That's looking like a nice kind of pale bordering on a tinge of gold, which the decoction mash is what we have to thank for that, getting that extra color into the beer rather than just being pale straw hay kind of color. So we're going to run 25 liters of sparge water over the top of our grain bed. We've already added our salts, added our phosphoric acid, so the water chemistry is accounted for. We're just going to rinse and repeat this until we've gotten every scrap of sugar out of these grains, and then we can move on to our boiling step and start talking about hops. See you then. Now it is time to add our first round of bittering hops for this Czech lager. This is going to be 28 grams / 1 ounce of Saaz hops. So a very, very traditional hop variety for specifically Czech beers and particularly Czech Pilsners. into the boil this one goes. This is going to be a 90-minute boil edition. That's going to give us 8.4 IBUs. And the purpose behind doing a very long extended boil for this one is because we're brewing a lager, and in particular because we're brewing a Czech-style Pilsner, we really want to drive off all of that DMS, that dimethyl sulfide, which can contribute off flavors to lagers. So kind of like the flavor of cooked corn or cabbage, which is definitely something we don't want in our final product. That extended boil time really helps to drive that off when you're using Pilsner grains. So we'll come back when we've got 30 minutes left in the boil for our next hop addition. Now, whilst you're doing this brew day, it's very important that you keep hydrated. So have a think about drinking our Belgian Saison, link to that video up there if you want to know how to make this particular beer, and have a think about getting some awesome Beer Banter and Bloody Good Times merch from our store in the link down below, or even think about becoming a Patreon and getting more involved in the behind the scenes of this channel. Now, back to the brew day. 30 minutes left in the boil. We're adding our 30-minute addition, which is 70 grams / 2.5 ounces of Saaz, and that's going to give us 14 IBUs into the boil. They go. And I suppose we should probably talk about why Saaz. It's going to give us kind of a bit of a spicy, earthy character. It's going to give us a little bit of a floral note in there, and it does have a touch of like kind of citrus or almost a bit of old school hop essence, I suppose. All of that's going to come together really nicely, and the whole idea behind adding multiple stages of Saaz hops is that we're trying to get the full spectrum of what Saaz can actually offer us, both from a bittering perspective at the start of the boil. The 30-minute addition is again a pretty decent bittering dose with a touch of flavor in there, and then our final addition at 5 minutes is going to be much more of the flavor bomb side of things when it comes to Saaz, from the floral element, the fruit element, this earthy, spicy element. But the idea behind those different stages of hops is IBUs, but also getting the full spectrum of what Saaz has to offer. Now, we'll come back with 5 minutes left. Final hop addition, 5 minutes going in now, which is going to give us 1.4 IBUs, giving us a grand total of 31 IBUs for this Czech lager. Now, after this has boiled for another 5 minutes, we are going to start cooling down to yeast pitching temperature. And because this is a Czech style lager, I want to ferment very cold. So I'm going to aim to be getting my wort down to 15 degrees Celsius, I think is going to be the goal for this one. Now we are down to cooling. So what I'm really curious to see about this one is how much coagulation we get with all of the proteins and hazy debris going on in here. Because the thing I have noticed whenever you do a decoction mash is you have disturbed the grain bed so much, you don't end up with crystal clear wort after mashing the way that you often can with a traditional lager, like an Australian lager, a German lager, etc. Basically anything where you don't disturb the grain bed. This always ends up being a little bit hazier. But I think with proper lagering techniques in the tank, we can fix that. But for the time being, we're going to aim to be getting that down to 15C, like I said before, and then we can start transferring and talking about yeast. Time to transfer. It's coming out of the tap at 17 degrees Celsius, which is good enough for me to talk about getting it into the tank. Time to talk yeast. Today, we need to go traditional. We need to treat this beer right. So we're using the White Labs Buddha-Voice. Someone correct me on how to say that. It's a weird word. I was going to call it Beetlejuice before because it looks so similar. But this particular yeast strain is from southern Czech Republic. It's going to give us a very clean, very dry finishing yeast, dry finishing lager that's going to really allow the bitterness and the character of the hops to shine through. So that Saaz is really going to get to be front and center when it comes to the yeast esters. It's also really good at producing low amounts of DMS and low amounts of diacetyl. It's really late and I just could not remember the word. But I did make a starter out of it because this was quite an expensive liquid yeast, and this is designed for a 5-gallon / like 24 liter kind of pitch, and we've obviously got a double the amount of that. So made a yeast starter. about 18-ish hours ago now to help double up the amount of yeast cells that we're going to be pitching for this one. So we are good to go ahead and throw them in. Oh, I'm doing this for the camera and it's not good. Oh, the yeast. No! Many millions of cells died in the making of this video.
The one thing that went wrong this whole brew.
Oh,
You
damn.
missed the yeast.
Damn. It was a pretty flawless brew day though. Now let's talk wrapped pill. Wrapped pill is gonna go in as well so I can track the fermentation for this one and give you guys some pretty graphs. If you don't know what this is, there's a full video up there that explains what wrapped pills are and if they're worth it. Spoiler alert, yes. Basically, it gives you real-time data feeds to your phone about your fermentation in progress. If you want to buy one, there'll be a link down below on where you can get it from. Now, the next time you guys see me will be when we're pouring a fresh beer in hand, but the one thing I do want to point out is that we're going to be fermenting this low and slow. So it's going to be fermenting at 10 degrees Celsius. I suspect most of fermentation will be done in about 2 weeks from now. It is going to be slower, maybe 3 weeks. And I'm also going to gradually lower the temperature after doing a diacetyl rest, bumping it up by 2 degrees for 2 days. Once I start lagering, I'm going to lower the temperature each day by about 3 degrees until we're sitting at a cold crash. I've watched a few videos on this, done a bit of homework on this. It should give us better head retention at the end of this because we're going to shock the yeast less. But if you want to see a full video on this, let us know in the comments down below and we can do a full deep dive and explainer on it. Now, the next time you guys see me will be when we have a fresh Czech lager. And here she is. Now, the first thing I have to point out, and that I should have pointed out in the cold opener, is that this has not lagered out yet. I am very aware that a Pilsner should be crystal clear. I've made many of them, but YouTube is a very, very thirsty beast, and we needed to get this video out. So apologies to the beer because I really should have left this for like another 3 weeks before I actually started pouring this one on tap. But I've got another keg and a half sitting in the bar, so I guess I'll just have to give you guys an update on that one over on Patreon, I suppose, later when that beer is fully lagered out. Link to Patreon down below. But this beer is pouring a very fluffy, creamy white head, as you'll see in the B-roll showing up right now. It's got an awesome golden hue. Like, if I just put my light through the beer here, that's camera. If I put my light through the beer here, this is what it looks like to me. That's the best way that I can think of to give you a representation through the camera, because lighting is a funny thing when you go on video. It doesn't always appear the way that you can see it in person, but it is, I promise, super golden, super pretty, heaps of carbonation, which is exactly what we want. This was carbonated to 2.7 volumes, so quite heavy because I want this to be a very refreshing, very thirst quenching, very effervescent style of beer, which is exactly what a Czech Pilsner should be. Came in a little heavy on the booze at 5.3%, should have been lower than that, but I'm not unhappy with that because the flavor is just beautiful. Let's go in for taste. Like, the best thing that I can compare this to that I've made is my Helles lager, the German Helles lager, which had a bunch of Munich in there and everything to give it extra body, extra breadiness, nuttiness, and complexity. This has all of that with nothing but the Bohemian Pilsner malt, the floor-malted malt. So I have to say huge props to them because, man, they make some good quality grain. Like, that's absolutely what has made this beer, is the quality of that grain. It's got huge complexity in terms of a bready character. It's got a little bit of like a honey-like sweetness. There's a bit of biscuitiness in there. And I mean, I guess that's A, quality of grain, and B, double decoction. Like, those melanoidins are definitely in there. The color of this beer is darker than it would have been if I had just done a single stage mash, like a regular Australian lager. It would have been a much, much lighter color. So that double decoction has absolutely added a huge amount of complexity. And I mean, I don't know if it's in my head that melanoidin malts can't replicate this, but certainly I feel a sense of accomplishment at having done it the real way. So I think that's making me enjoy it just that much more. So if you haven't done a decoction mash yet, highly recommend it. It is an incredibly rewarding experience when you get to pour a beer like this with such a simple base of ingredients. And that Saaz is just awesome. First time I've ever used it, absolutely going to be using it again. I understand why the Czechs love it now. It's got that little bit of zest to it, that little bit of citrus, that little bit of earthy-like character, like a touch of spiciness, bringing it all together. It's just a really, really delightful beer, and it's super smashable. This is just so easy to drink. And although the IBUs are technically quite high, it doesn't come off that way because the water profile is just so soft. It makes it not so bitter, not so harsh. Like, so even though you're punching pretty high with those IBUs, it is not drinking that way. I think this ended up around 30 IBUs or something in that ballpark. Absolutely does not feel like it. So all in all, massive success. I will definitely be letting this lager out so I can enjoy it properly. And I'll release a short or snip it into a future brew day somewhere for when I do actually let that lager. But for the meantime, I need to say a thank you to our Patreons for supporting us outside of YouTube, chatting with us over on the Patreon channel about beers they're brewing, beers we're brewing. There's a whole chat forum going on over there. So if you want to talk to us more directly, Patreon's your best friend, link down below. And next week, I think what we're going to be doing is a how to pour Czech beer lesson, because I'm really bad at it. First time I've ever pulled from a side pour tap. So I'm going to be doing a bit of practice this weekend, pouring more than a few pints, so that next week I can show you guys the 3 different methods for pouring a Czech lager. Cheers, guys. Or should I say, na zdraví, I think it is. And we'll catch you next week.